I am I am Mark Aiken. I am the Mid-Atlantic Regional Representative for Presbyterians for Earth Care, and so actually the speaker tonight, Ann Wapel, comes from, well, not at the moment, but from where she works is within my region, which is an interesting coincidence. Also a colleague of mine when we both used to work for NOAA. We work together. We've even published together. So it's great to have someone who we've worked together professionally in a scientific capacity and now in a Presbyterian capacity. And it's wonderful to have Ann Wapel, the sorry, disaster assistance director. That's the correct term?
Disaster recovery coordinator. Yeah.
Recovery coordinator, yeah, sorry, of
Yeah.
Western North Carolina, with us to talk about what's going on in terms of hurricanes and floods and the connections between climate change and the Presbyterian disaster assistance and how we can deal with all of this. And it's a whole suite of issues that Anne will only be able to start to touch on in the presentation, but really looking forward to that. So let me open us up in prayer. Creator God, thank you for this beautiful world in which we live. As we come upon the celebration of Earth Day this week, let us remember what the psalmist said in Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers. May we work to protect that world that the Lord has given us. And as those who live in it, may we tread lightly and may we look upon what we do and how we do things to be to the benefit of our world rather than to its detriment. Be with all of those who have been harmed by hurricanes, floods, and other disasters, and all those who have come to the assistance of those in need, working through our disaster assistance and other denominations' disaster assistance programs, all of which are doing such great work to help people. Be with us this evening as we learn more about how things are happening within your world and how we can respond to it. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So, Anne, with that, we will open it up to you and you may share your slides and give us your input.
Thank you. And it was so fun to come across Mark again after not having worked together for a number of years at this point, and I had no idea that we shared the same Presbyterian tradition. So that was really fun, and Mark's team, as he said, got to come to Western North Carolina this last summer and be part of the recovery there. So we've had such an overwhelming amount of support from across the PCUSA and many churches, both in terms of volunteers and financially, that have allowed us to really kickstart the recovery. So, and I'll say a little bit more about that as well. So, as Mark mentioned, my background is climate change, and so being in the disaster recovery business is not something I predicted for my career, but from a number of different reasons, it came together this year, and I was grateful to be able to step into the hurricane recovery. So I wanted to start a little bit with where we are with Hurricane Helene and its recovery, and then I'll go into what happened to cause the flooding in Western North Carolina and other areas, and then what we can expect going forward. So this picture that you can see on the screen, hopefully, is The little blue dot there is me in Maryville, Tennessee. This was from the Weather Channel app that I was looking at during the Hurricane Helene. And you can see most of the rainfall there over western North Carolina, but I'm right in the eye of Hurricane Helene, or Tropical Storm Helene as it was then. And it's quite something, even with a degrading hurricane, to be able to see that progression of winds coming from one direction and then a little bit of calm and then winds coming from another direction. And at the time, we did not know quite how serious the situation was in Western North Carolina, and it would only become clear in the following days just how serious that was. This is our presbytery in Western North Carolina. It's 23 counties and sits that top diagonal border there is the border with Tennessee. Upper East Tennessee also had very significant impacts. That's the Holston Presbytery. And so we work a little bit with Holston. We also work with Salem Presbytery, which is just off to the east there, and also with Foothills Presbytery in South Carolina and Georgia as well. So the impact was much broader than that, of course, but even in our little Southern Appalachia area, we're able to work across presbyteries to make sure that we're looking at the recovery holistically. I'm going to show a map in a little bit about where all of the impact was, but essentially only the very far southwest counties did not receive much impact from this storm. All the way to Charlotte and all throughout the rest of the 23 counties, we had major pockets of impacts across the region. So I am putting some serious miles on my car, let me tell you, as we go around for this region. And the details on this map are not super important, but I just wanted to just show you the topography and to show you just how steep and rugged some of this area is. You know, we don't think about the Blue Ridge or the Smokies being particularly, rugged, at least as compared to the Rockies or the Sierra, but we have incredibly steep slopes. And from Asheville, which is about 2,500 feet, to the top of Mount Mitchell, which is 6,800 feet or something like that, so that height difference is just about the same as, Boulder to some of the mountains right above Boulder. So the steepness of the slopes, the narrowness of the valleys, and the water that is flowing at the bottom there, as well as this being the only mountain area in the range that sort of enhances the rainfall, makes it a really risky area for flooding. And I'll get into a little bit more about the specific situation we faced in Helene. This, however, is a picture from 1916. And this was the previous big flood that Asheville has. This is looking down the French Broad River in Asheville. I think this is right about where on the left there, sort of going up the hill, is where the town of Asheville would be now. And on the right is where West Asheville is. This now would be on the other side of that bridge, would be where we would consider the River Arts District to be right now. And there's warehouses that have been turned into studios and so on. That was destroyed in Helene. The River Arts District essentially is very little of it actually remains intact. So this flood in 2024 with Hurricane Helene was very similar to what we saw in 1916. It exceeded it slightly, actually. But it's not that we haven't seen this kind of flooding before. And this was a quote from the Asheville Citizen, the newspaper at the time, that they were the day after that 1916 flood. They said, exacting an unknown toll of death with a property loss exceeding $3 million, Asheville today is absolutely isolated from the outside world, is a city of darkness void of ordinary transportation facilities, and finds herself helpless in the grasp of the most terrible flood conditions ever known here. You absolutely could have written that on September 27th of 2024. It was cut off entirely. I-26, one of the big highways, and I-40 were completely closed, and we had no power and no water either. So that was we may have not learned as much as we maybe could have since 1916 in terms of how to protect ourselves from these floods. So, but the 1916 hurricane was also, the 1916 flood was also a hurricane. It came from the Atlantic and got to Category 5 right off the coast of Charleston and dissipated over Western North Carolina. And it was a similar setup in the sense that it was several days of very heavy rain. Hurricane Helene, of course, was also the cause, hurricane was also the cause of these floods. This is the satellite image as it was coming ashore in Florida. You can see how big, how much cloud there was with this hurricane. The actual core of the hurricane was not super big, but the cloud extent was pretty significant. And the track of this hurricane was from the Gulf. This was one of the most amazingly forecast hurricanes that I've seen in any that I've looked at with NOAA. Before it even formed, this was the track forecast. And so it from just off the coast of Mexico there, before it was even a depression, this was the track that they forecast, and this was the exact track that it took. It's really remarkable, and we've come just in the last decade or so a really long way in terms of hurricane forecasts. They're not all this good, but the models on this one were so tightly aligned. We had several days of warning that this would be where the landfall was and what the strength would be. So a major hurricane off the shore and became a tropical storm as it came ashore or after it came ashore in Georgia, and was still just about a tropical storm by the time it reached the Carolinas. So really strong winds with this storm, as well as a lot of rainfall for the interior. And I'll talk a little bit about that with respect to how that meshes with what we're seeing on a climate prediction basis. This was the actual setup for Hurricane Helene, though, and before Helene even came ashore, we had several days of rainfall ahead of time that got sort of vacuumed up from the Gulf, not necessarily quite associated with Helene, but it was all this tropical moisture that got sucked up and stuck on the mountains. So we had this trough that kind of kept it in place, and then the mountains enhanced the rainfall. And so from Wednesday and Thursday onwards, we had 2 or 3 days of rain. So 10 to 15 inches of rain even before we saw Hurricane Helene rains. And that made the wind part of the storm much more dangerous because it took down trees much more easily. But these were the rainfall totals for the whole event. So Wednesday through to Saturday. The hurricane made landfall on Thursday night in Florida, and Friday morning was when it had its major impact in Western North Carolina. So Busick is on the top right of this table here. Busick is next door to Mount Mitchell, and we got almost 31 inches of rain in total at that site, which is unreal. Mount Mitchell and Boone up there also in that same sort of area, 20 and 24 inches. But you can see even down in the lowlands, sort of as Georgia comes up into the mountains there, 14 inches in Tallulah, Georgia. South Carolina, Table Rock, that's right on the border with North Carolina, 14 inches. So really widespread, lots of rain from this event. And you can see on the map there, that dark red area is 10 or 15 or more inches across a wide area of the mountains there. And all of that runs downhill. So all of that ended up in the rivers at the bottom of the mountains. This was the impact of all of that. In Western North Carolina, we had a little over 100 deaths. I'm actually completely shocked it's not more than that. If you could see some of the damage, it's amazing that it was not in excess of that. 250 people overall across at least 7 states. The number of homes, though, destroyed or damaged significantly in Western North Carolina is an immense number. So 120,000 homes, at least 80,000 of those are fairly significantly in need of repair. But the biggest immediate impact was that it messed with the major reservoir in Asheville, and we had 53 days without any water. 53 days. It's hard to imagine even 2 days without water. And this was 53. So one of the immediate tasks was to provide drinking water for everybody. We had water flown in, and then after the roads were gradually cleared, we had trucks driving up from central North and South Carolina to come up and deliver water. And that was something that people dealt with for almost 2 months. And so the ongoing effect of this, just in the relief stage, which usually doesn't last that long, was really significant. And the estimated total in cost of this ordeal for everybody is at least 60 billion in Western North Carolina. I think that will end up being an underestimate by the time we're all done. And then, of course, there's cascading effects, like unemployment. The Asheville area in particular is mostly tourism driven. And so lots of restaurants and retail that just could not be open, partly because there was no water. All of the schools were closed for a long time. And so unemployment became an issue. In Mitchell County, there was a prison that is a big employer in the region, and they had to move all of the prisoners because there was no water. So lots of impacts, and still unemployment is high in Western North Carolina. All of the roads were closed, literally all of them. I-40, and I still have to deal with this when I'm going back and forth to Tennessee, is 2 lanes of I-40 fell into the Pigeon River through the gorge between Tennessee and North Carolina. It would be many years before that is fully repaired. There's now 1 lane in each direction, which is interesting. And there are some places where literally there's a barrier and you can see that from the lane on the riverside right down into the gorge. So there's absolutely billions and billions of dollars of repair just to I-40 alone. But every single road was covered in mud, or many of the bridges were taken out. We're still repairing some of those. We just actually had a bridge dedication ceremony in the Chimney Rock area near Hendersonville in Western North Carolina, and that's a year and a half before some fairly major throughways have been addressed. This is just to give you a sense of all of the little pockets of damage. So it's not just a sort of one large area of damage where you might have, for example, on the coast, you might have pretty coherent area that was impacted by flooding and wind. Here, it's essentially where the river valleys intersect with small communities. So, and this is by far not all of the damage. It's just these are some of the quote highlights of where we're working and what we're doing. But it's all in these all these little pockets. You can drive around and it's all fine and it looks like there's no damage at all. And then you'll round a corner and it's utter devastation. And that's usually where the river intersects the road or a community. I'm just gonna highlight a couple of things here. Marshall here in the middle in Madison County, that's north of Asheville, and Micaville, I might talk about as well, up there between Burnsville and Spruce Pine. These are towns where we have Presbyterian churches and that were particularly hard hit. This is Marshall Presbyterian Church. It's hard to see in this picture, but the water line was up to the windowsill of the 2nd floor. So it was the whole of the lower floor was flooded, and then up to about the windowsill of the 2nd floor, which is their sanctuary. So in the days after and all of the windows and doors were washed out on the lower level, everything that was inside washed out down the river. In fact, the transitional pastor of Marshall had been wondering what to do with some old choir robes that they didn't need anymore. She said, well, the French Broad River took care of that. So they were all washed down the French Broad. But in the days after the storm, there was mud, about 2 feet of mud in the upper level, all just sort of dripping through the floor into the lower level. Everything was covered in feet and feet of mud. And so it took many volunteers just to scrape out the flood mess from this area. We had 3 churches that were completely offline, and Green Mountain is still recovering, but Marshall and Micaville are now up and running. They're not quite fully repaired, but they're repaired enough to hold services, and Marshall came back online just right before Christmas, and so it was wonderful to help celebrate with them. When I showed up in about a month after the storm, they were already standing in this completely gutted church and saying, we didn't want this, but now we've got this opportunity to become a hub for the town in a different way. We want to figure out how to rebuild so that we can get more kids and more art and music. And it was amazing to be part of those conversations where they were already bringing imagination and so much heart and soul to the recovery process. And so if you ever get a chance to join the people in Marshall Presbyterian, they are people that are fun to know, for sure. But of course, it wasn't our churches that were only our churches that were affected. Our churches also became hubs of recovery. And so in the days and weeks and months after the storm, this is Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church. They were a place to go get food, place to go get supplies. They have done over $5 million now in rent assistance for people who were displaced or whose jobs went away. So they're doing an amazing job. Black Mountain Presbyterian Church, right after the storm, was feeding 900 people a day in their parking lot, which is unbelievable. Hundreds of volunteers came to participate in that. And many of the other churches, we got about 88 churches, I think, in the presbytery. Many of those were fully involved in the relief effort.
What do we do?
So it was wonderful to be part of that. Now, the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance folks, as well as the Presbytery in Western North Carolina, we've been able to provide grants to host volunteers. So we've got 3 churches who are hosting volunteers. Canton Presbyterian in the west, First Presbyterian Spruce Pine in the north, and New Hope Presbyterian in South Asheville. And so we can cover 8 or 9 counties with those host sites. And we are almost fully booked through July, at least at this point. And I have many emails today, in fact, to return for people who want to come in the summer and fall. So Presbyterians are really showing up and making an enormous difference in the recovery. We're working closely with the United Methodists and many other work partners in this. So we're able to really spread our volunteers through different projects. And we're literally still mucking out houses that haven't been touched since the storm. So it's an incredible amount of work still to do. We'll be here for many years. But I just wanted to share a few stats from last year. We had at least 40 different teams that came through Presbyterian Disaster Assistance from all over the country. I think the farthest person came from Arizona. It meant that we could get something like 475 volunteers working on houses, and we're able to touch houses in at least 9 counties. We've been all over the place. And that's a very conservative estimate of the number of houses we've worked on. We didn't monitor that up front. And so, but every week we're working on different houses. So I wanted to show you, though, that this is not super unusual. So 1916 and 2024, we knew that we had floods caused by hurricanes. I know just from living there for 25 years that we also had flooding in 2004 from 2 back-to-back remnant hurricanes. And 2021, we had Tropical Storm Fred that came across. And so I was thinking to my, the whole conversation in Nashville has been around, well, we didn't ever think that a hurricane would cause this much damage. And I was like, well, how likely is that really? So I went to NOAA, and there's a program there that tracks, that records all of the tracks of hurricanes and reconstructs them from before we had satellites. And I did a little area around Western North Carolina and East Tennessee, and just said, show me all of the hurricane tracks for the last 100 years or so. And in this image, there's about 50 different tracks. So roughly one every other year or so on average. So each one of these has the potential to produce rainfall that could cause flooding. Not all of them did. Actually, most of them did not. But certainly they've got the potential to do that. And that's over the last 100 years when we haven't seen as much impact from climate change. The two circles there are Knoxville and Asheville, just to give you a little sense of what this region is. Only one of these hurricanes, there's a little orange line there on the right, was actually at full hurricane strength when it came across the mountains. I believe that it's not labeled on there, but I believe that's Hugo. That was still at hurricane strength, but it got to Charlotte. But most of these are tropical storms or depressions when they come across, but they still bring a lot of rainfall. When NOAA looked at the impact of climate change on this particular hurricane in Helene, the conclusion was that 3-day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday rainfall, that amount of rain was made about 70% more likely by climate change. That to me is an incredibly big number, 70% more likely from climate change. So we can say with confidence that there is a pretty significant impact of climate change on this event. And this is why, right? So a very consistent, I'll explain this in a second, but a very consistent impact of climate change is when it rains heavily, we get a lot more water falling out of the sky. And so what this is on the top 1% of annual days that we typically get rain. So if you think about maybe the top 3 rainfall events in any given year, so where you might be, that might be a 2-inch rainfall or a 3-inch rainfall, something like that. For the Southeast now, we're getting 37% more water falling out of the sky in those events. So for the Northeast and Upper Midwest, it's even higher, 60% more rainfall in the heaviest events. So this means if, let's say your heaviest event in any given year was 3 inches, you're now looking at a 4.5-inch rainfall event. And that's an enormous difference in terms of how we manage stormwater. If your heaviest rainfall is 4 inches, now we're looking at a 6-inch rainfall event for the same kind of event. So we're seeing really an incredibly big shift in the amount of stormwater that we have to deal with. In terms of the change in hurricane, and this is just, by the way, this is just observed. This is just what we've seen up to now. This is not projected into the future. This is actual data that we've observed over the last few decades. With hurricanes, what we're seeing is there's not really a significant trend in the frequency of hurricanes, how many we get in any given year. There is some increase in the Atlantic basin in the hurricanes that we get since around 1970. Most of that trend is in the very strongest hurricanes, in the category 4 and 5 ones. But what we are seeing is that hurricanes are tending to intensify more rapidly. And that's a problem for warnings. For example, if you have a hurricane right offshore that intensifies rapidly, that makes it much harder to warn people of the danger. And really interesting, and we can't explain it. This is not something we know why at the moment, but it also looks like hurricanes are getting slower in their track or stalling as part of their track. So that means more rainfall, but it also means if they're stalling off the coast, more storm surge, because it will pile up water at the coast. So that could be very detrimental for impacts on land. About a 17% reduction in speed in the movement of hurricanes. So that's something that they will definitely be paying more attention to in the next assessment. which I'll talk about in a minute. Also, as hurricanes come on shore, they usually lose energy as they come on shore. They quickly become a tropical storm or tropical depression, but that's now also happening more slowly. And so we can see that in Hurricane Helene, it was still a tropical storm really close to the southern Appalachian Mountains, which is way inland, of course. And so we're starting to get more wind with some of those storms inland as well. And the biggest shift by far is that all of these tropical systems, almost all, have significantly increased rainfall associated with them. And if you just look at a handful of storms over this last 10 years or so, Hurricane Harvey, it was 60 inches of rainfall in some locations in Texas. I did a little analysis of that at the time because we have something in NOAA called probable maximum precipitation, which we sometimes use with managers of dams for the purposes of managing, the potential maximum amount of rainfall you could theoretically get in any given place for a specific amount of time. And Harvey came really close to the probable maximum precip for those locations, which made me think we are probably wrong in the probable maximum precipitation calculations. That should be a sort of physical limit to how much rainfall we get. I think we're seeing such a change in the system that we can no longer quite capture that. Hurricane Florence, 35 inches. Imelda in 2019, 44 inches. These are just unbelievable amounts of rainfall. So both hurricanes and rainfall together are causing more of this impact. And that leads to an increase in the cost and frequency of disasters. So the bars here are the number of disasters since 1980 to 2026. We actually got the year to date already on this storm. So on the left is the number of events, and on the right is the cost of events. The bars are the number of events, and you can see they track it by different kinds of disaster. Flooding and also severe storms are accounting for more of that disasters. And this is only counting the disasters that cost at least $1 billion or more. So it's not every disaster, but it's the ones that are the most costly. This, by the way, was created in NOAA, and it rested there for a long time. It was a program that was well used. This is no longer a part of NOAA. It was one of the programs that was cut. But it is now housed by Climate Central, and they hired the person who created the methodology for this. And so it is still in existence. And I got this from Climate Central today. And it's a super useful accounting, really, of what the impact of this kind of weather event is. The lines here is the cost. And you can basically, over this whole period, we've exceeded at least $3 trillion of weather-related disaster costs just from these billion-dollar disasters. So you can see, and this is for two reasons, of course. One is that the number of weather events is increasing. The other part of it is that we're putting more stuff in the way of these weather events. And so, so the impact to us is more significant. We're also, the stuff that is in the way is also more expensive over time, but this is cost adjusted. And so that has taken that bit of the equation out. So these are real increases in the cost and the number of disasters. So what's about to happen? So we're at 2026. When I was in grad school and we were looking at the projections out for 2050 and 2100, I was like, nobody cares. It's so far in the future. It's not so far in the future now. And so these are real projections that many of us will have to deal with. So this is the projection for extreme precipitation events for a number of different potential futures. And so we've got the current at the top. In the pale blue is the change. So if we were looking at, say, a 2.2-inch rainfall today, if global temperatures rose by about 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we're just about there, we're very close to that right now, that 2.2 inch rainfall would become about a 2.5 inch rainfall. If we're looking at degrees Celsius, which we're certainly projecting to hit this century, then that rainfall would become about a 2.6 inch rainfall, and so on. The bottom one here, a 4 degrees Celsius increase, that is unlikely to occur. It is not out of the question, which is why we put it there. But of course, that would have a major impact. The current projections by the end of the century are that we would be somewhere between 2 degrees and about 3.7 degrees by the end of the century. So this is all within the realm of possibility. It is still completely plausible to keep our temperature below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We might overshoot it a little bit and then come back, but it is still well within possibility to keep it to this lower end here. And this is that same statistic that I showed about the top 1% of heavy rainfall days. This is the projected change into the future. And you can see an interesting little bullseye around southern Appalachia and the Tennessee Valley for about a 30 to 40% increase in the amount of rainfall falling on those top 3 days a year, something like that. The Northeast as well. But almost all of the country sees an increase in the heaviest rainfall events. So we are definitely looking a little wetter, actually wetter overall, but especially in the heavy rainfall events. And this is the projected flooding into the future. So on the left there is 2020. This is the average annual loss from all types of flooding in 2020 per county. And so $20 million or more is in the dark red. And you can see how many counties in 2020 had at least $20 million of losses. Projected forward to 2050, the difference between 2050 and 2020 is what you're seeing there. And an additional 20% change is possible for many coastal counties. This is the annual losses from flooding. And you can see that particularly for the Southeast and up through the Mid-Atlantic, parts of the Pacific Northwest, there's some significant projections of additional loss. This is millions and billions of dollars in total that we will have to absorb as a nation. So the projections for hurricanes, if we were to hit 2 degrees Celsius, the ocean water temperatures are one really important part of that. So we are very likely to see an increase in the strength of hurricanes and tropical storms, maybe 5% increase in wind speed, something like 3% for the Atlantic Basin. And by the way, very likely means a 90% chance. This is a language we use in global climate assessments to mean something specific. Very likely means 90% chance of an increase in strength. Likely is 66% or higher chance. So an increase in the number of very strong hurricanes is likely. Interestingly, an overall decline in the number of hurricanes is also likely. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think it's probably because the Arctic is warming faster than the tropics. And so there's actually less need for hurricanes to transport heat, which is what they do best. So there's complicated reasons for that, but I think we'll see. The projection is that we'll see an overall decline in the number of hurricanes, and very likely is an increase in precipitation, which we've talked about. So what would happen to a storm like Hurricane Helene if we looked ahead with 2 degrees Celsius? It would probably be something like 15 to 25% more likely that we would have an event like Helene. We've already had about 2 in the last 100 years. So if we ended up with another one in 100 years, for example, or another half a one, you start to see it becoming a generational event instead of something that happens outside of anyone's living memory. And that has an impact on whether we're really willing to rebuild. So I just want to say one couple things. As I've been learning about the faith-based role throughout this last year and a half since Helene, um, a couple of things have really struck me about how we show up in these situations. The first thing, and this is a report from the Public Religion Research Institute from 2023, so it's very recent. This is the thing that we're struggling against within some denominations and some parts of faith-based organizations. We are third from the bottom there, white mainline non-evangelical Protestant, and 33% of Protestant faith-based organizations think that climate change is mostly caused by natural patterns in the earth environment. 54% would say it's caused by human activity. That gets worse if you're looking at white evangelical Protestants. 49% would believe that climate change is mostly natural. So this is a real part of our education, our learning about what's happening, and also our sharing about what's happening, is that we clearly have a lot of work to do to just bring people to the same place of understanding and pulling science into our faith-based discussions. Without the faith-based organizations in Western North Carolina, we would not be anywhere near where we are in terms of recovery. So it's critical. I mean, Presbyterians are a small denomination compared to all of like Methodists and Catholic Charities and Episcopal Relief, and we're all working together. Absolutely critical in this initial relief, and then there's response and the longer term recovery phase of disaster management. However, we all really differ in the way that we do this, and I would suggest and hope that we can come to some consensus principles on how we work in disasters. There are some folks on the ground in Western North Carolina, for example, who will make a homeowner sign a faith statement before they will help rebuild the house. And that is absolutely not what Presbyterian disaster assistance does. It's not what United Methodists or Episcopal or Catholics do. And so we're working right now together on an ecumenical statement that we would like to make clear to people that our criteria are you going to have trouble recovering by yourself? Like, that's it. And so we're there to help anyone who is in need of it. It's also true that our volunteers right now, this week, we are rebuilding homes, and those homes are still in the floodplain. There aren't FEMA maps that are updated. We are using Catholic Charities, their GIS expertise, to look at evolving floodplain, and also the State Department of Environmental Quality has some new floodplain maps. But I think it's important for us to now look not just at sort of how we bring volunteers in and how we do the relief and how we rebuild, but what is our role in bringing climate adaptive approaches to these recovery efforts? We are typically not at the table when the discussions are made for should we rebuild here? And if we are going to rebuild, what's the local zoning or local codes that we will want to adopt? Should we raise these houses, even if FEMA doesn't require it, for example? And how do we prepare for future disasters and mitigate their impact? What's our faith-based role in that? I think these are really important discussions. We are creating a preparedness network in Southern Appalachia, and we have ecumenically, and so we're talking about how we help churches and presbyteries and dioceses and so on become more prepared and more knowledgeable about this. This is my take on the matter, is that one of our core beliefs is that we're here to reduce the suffering of others. And that means not just helping people right now in the aftermath of a disaster, but also planning for future events so that we reduce their future suffering. That means that we have to look at climate change and we have to look at how things are changing. We've also lost the church in many cases as a hub of the community. And I think this is one area where this can become a place that we re-engage in communities and really serve in ways that don't have to be religiously based. It can be just part of our mission to build resilience and invite people back to be served in their community. The way that FEMA tries to help train communities, they have this sort of 32 core competencies that they look at. Not every community has to have every one, but I would say if we look at our faith-based role, at most, we are looking at 2 of those 32 competencies. One is the immediate relief and aftermath. One is rebuilding housing. But we've got all these, got 30 others that we could also look at with building resilience, how we might provide public information ahead or after a storm. We could be the go-to place for some people in the community. Long-term vulnerability reduction, that's part of our mission in peacetime or blue sky time as well. Hazard assessments and so on. We've got expertise and I think an obligation to share that. And I think it's particularly important because we are not just looking at the economic impact or the infrastructure impact. We are looking at whole people, the holistic approach. And so we can blend that emotional and spiritual care along with other needs and create that sense of belonging, which I feel like so many people are lacking at the moment. And we have evidence to suggest that the loneliness is a core part of that. So we have lots of work to do, but I would love us to have more of a conversation about that. And to illustrate that, this is Marshall Presbyterian Church holding a community meeting, facilitated community meeting for what Marshall can do, and especially the church can do to help rebuild and become more of a hub in the community. And all kinds of people across Marshall's community were invited to this and led by the Presbyterian Church. This was a super helpful meeting for them to have early on in the process. So I will leave it there. And if we have time, I would love to have some discussion or questions. This was a house, by the way, in west of Asheville that we had some teams working in, and the homeowner asked the team to write a few of her favorite Bible verses on the studs before they got covered up by drywall. And so there's a picture.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Anne. That's a great presentation. And just to answer a quick question from Gwen Smith, yes, we announced this earlier. The presentation is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. We do have some questions and look forward to seeing more of them. We'll start with some in the chat. I will comment first that I was astonished in that one slide you had on the precipitation increase and the heaviest percent of days, and that bullseye right on top of you. That was that was just amazing.
Yeah. Yes, it
Wow.
was. I think that was what was so surprising to people, is that it was just all fell right there at 30 inches of rain.
Yeah. What first question we had in the chat was, how strong were the winds in your area?
So there were tropical storm force winds, which starts at about 34, 37 miles per hour. And so we had gusts well in excess of that. Those were some of the 30 plus miles an hour was some of the regular winds, but gusting well in excess of that. I have not looked at the latest, corrected data from then, but I'm sure we had gusts of 50 miles an hour plus. The amount of trees that were lost in some areas, that 40% of the forest canopy was lost, which is extraordinary. And it was definitely in pockets. You can see where the wind sort of hit the top of slopes and caused more blowdown. We're still doing debris removal, and that won't be many years. One thing I forgot to mention is about compound events. In the spring after Helene, we had some wildfires in the southern part. It was dry, and we had some wildfires, and the debris from a hurricane can, of course, make wildfires more likely or more impactful as well. So those are the kinds of things we're now dealing with. All this debris still sitting there. If we had another flood, that would a lot to deal with in terms of the stuff in the rivers and wildfires. So
Great. Um, it was interesting, the discussion of the billion-dollar disasters. I've That's something I've watched, and the fact that the administration eliminated that from something NOAA was doing. I was so glad Climate Central picked that up.
me too.
Gwen was asking, is the flooding data also from NOAA or Climate Central? That's still all within NOAA. That hasn't been eliminated, has it?
No, I mean, most of the images that I took are from the National Climate Assessment,
Hmm.
and this is something that is legally required to be produced every 4 years. So the last one was the fifth one, and that was produced it was released in 2023. So the next one should be in 2027. It won't be because all of the infrastructure to support that assessment has been eliminated. So that's I worked on the third National Climate Assessment. I was the technical director for it, and a bit of the fourth. Um, this is one of the only ways we know how to understand our state of the climate. So we collect all of the information together from all the agencies and all the research and so on, and that's how we get to know what we know. And so it's a really critical program. It looks also at adaptation measures, mitigation measures for climate, and how we're doing along those lines. It's an impressive effort with thousands of contributors, and that has now all of that work has been taken down to zero. So it will take many years to ramp back up again. And so I'm not sure when the next one will be.
Yeah,
And
that's
NOAA
great.
is a key agency in that work, probably the key agency in that work.
Yeah, that is so frustrating. We had a comment from Beth who says she's with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, and they have a resilience hub guide for faith communities. And feel free to use it if it's helpful or reach out with questions. And so there's a link to that in the chat that
Yeah.
everyone who's interested can look at. Um,
That is great. One of the things we're doing right now is literally collecting all of our different guidance and resources from all of the different faith-based institutions. And, the Lutherans are good at this, and the Catholics are good at that, and the Episcopal. And so we have a whole library that we're accumulating. And what we want to do is to meld them as appropriate, but at least to know all of the different ways in which we do this. So would love to talk with you more about that, actually.
Yeah,
Great.
I'd be happy to. Please feel free to reach out. And thanks for all the
Great.
work you're doing. Yeah,
And North Georgia would really be part of our Southern Appalachian network if we can get that up and running. So that would be great.
great. Yeah, I'm happy to help. Feel free to connect.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Excellent. Great to have these connections made as well. Um, uh, Gwen was asking, what's the name of that program at NOAA that tracks storms across the landmass? So that one where you're doing the GIS analysis of the previous storms.
It's not a very catchy name, but it's called IB Tracks, IBTRACS. And it's been in place a long time. That the work to go back and reconstruct some of the earlier tracks, especially from sort of 1880s onwards, involves a lot of detective work, um, but it's a hugely useful resource for all kinds of things. So, and that is still in place as far as I know. So you can go to the website and you can literally draw a polygon around the area you're interested in and set your parameters and look at it yourself.
Great tool.
Yeah.
Nora had a comment and a question. So it said, I'm grateful for your presentation about what Americans believe about where these extreme climate change events come from. Can churches strengthen the scientific conclusion that they're human caused?
I don't know whether we can strengthen the conclusion itself, but I think we can communicate that more effectively. Um, and especially share that it is not in conflict with how we show up as faith-based people. And so I'm hoping to just, even at my church, which is a pretty purple church politically, I'm hoping that we can do some climate change presentations this fall. And it's always helpful to start with things that are in your region. So starting with Hurricane Helene, for example, we've all been through that and we've experienced that. And so you can show how that actually looks on the landscape once you get into a situation that's impacted by climate. And people love the Smokies here and love our mountains, and so there are easy ways in the way we don't have to get too political about it. It is simply a scientific, data that we can share with people and reinforce our responsibilities as faith-based people. I think that's critical that we start to do that, especially actually now in the age where there's so much information online and it is so hard to figure out what's good, what's useful, what's authoritative. I think we can help to, curate that for people too.
And I see Nora has her hand up. I think she has a follow-on. Nora, you can unmute yourself. Oh, you are. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that we can communicate these things, because the more people realize their power to change things, both in our own behaviors, in using our energy sources wisely and economically, but also we have political power, and yeah, that can get tricky to communicate. But I do think that the churches have a role to communicate. I really like that you said that. Thank you so much. And any materials that come out of PCUSA would be wonderful. The Earth Care program. My congregation in Pittsburgh, we're an Earth Care congregation, and we have a project going right now, and we would be open to this kind of church-based flow of information about what we can do.
Great. Yes, I was just talking with them this week about that, so we could definitely find the resources to share. Yeah.
Great.
And we definitely have materials along these lines through Presbyterians for Earth Care, and it's a part of for those congregations that are Earth Care congregations or wish to become them. That sort of communication and reaching out is a very important part of what they do. I have one more question in the chat, and then we'll go to the people raising their hands. Natalie said, "Thank you for the presentation and for going into depth on the climate impacts while also giving us some hope that we can still reverse some of the trajectory we're now on." She says she's a conservation biologist and would also like to hear about the biodiversity impacts as people depend on that. And thank you for all that you do for the people of Western North Carolina.
The Western North Carolina is very much a team effort. So in terms of the biodiversity impact, over the last couple of years, I actually completed a naturalist certification for Southern Appalachia, which has been really fun, and it's deepened my appreciation for the biodiversity in this part of the world. I've always been a birder, but I have not known much about, say, salamanders, for example. So I got to learn all kinds of stuff. Was one of my ongoing questions in terms of our disaster recovery is we've focused a lot, and completely appropriately so, on getting people back into safe and secure housing and making sure people are on the path to recovery. We have not, however, focused very much on the ecological restoration. And I think that's something that we could blend in, and I'd like to see how we could formulate that. We are beginning to do some stream bank reinforcement and so on, but I also think that we could do some gathering of information to share what worked and what hasn't in terms of the impact on ecology, and also the ways in which natural solutions can help moderate the impacts of flooding. For example, in north of Asheville, in an area called Burnsville, the river that goes through there is Cane Creek River. And it's called Cane Creek because there's a local bamboo that is native to the area. And it was very clear where there was this cane on the side of the river, the flooding was less.
Mm.
The impact of the flooding was less. And so these are the kinds of things that, as we do our recovery, we ought to be sharing and being part of that conversation. In terms of climate change and biodiversity, I mean, we're certainly seeing some species shifts. Some species, the species that can migrate quicker might do better, although they still have to rely on their the other species that they eat. So there's, I think we will see quite a lot of biodiversity change this century. And we've also seen some amazing success stories of recovery. And if you leave places alone, they often do really well. I often tell the story of the bluebirds. When I first came to the States in 1996, I don't think I saw a bluebird for ages. And now you see them all the time everywhere. And it's because of a directed conservation effort, bluebird corridors, people learn how to build bluebird boxes and how to situate them and so on. There's a lot that we can do to positively impact that. And the national park system is great, but outside of the national park system, so we have lots that we can protect on that.
Great. We have a question from Bruce as well.
I'm very grateful for what you shared. This is excellent. My only disappointment isn't we didn't have more Presbyterians listening to you tonight. So I hope churches will take the recording and show it in their local congregations. I think you have done a wonderful job. The one area that I had a question about was I looked at the voting records of the two U.S. senators from North Carolina on environmental issues. One was rated 4%, the other was rated 11%. So part of the problem is who North Carolinians are sending to Congress and also electing as president. Has anybody tried to connect those dots with those elected officials that you are part of the problem because you're not addressing global weirding or climate crisis, whatever you want to call it?
And I live in East Tennessee, so that's even worse. I mean, yes, there have been lots of conversations. I mean, the western part of the state is pretty active politically as well. And
in New York, I can't talk to my local Republican congressman. He runs away from constituents. So I didn't know if you had a better chance than we did.
I will say that most of the state level representation has been through the governor's office. And Roy Cooper was there at the time of Helene, and now it's Josh Stein. And they have done a really, I think, pretty remarkable job of putting together the programs and support for the western part of the state. It's never enough, and there's always delays and difficulties, but they have a task force that they put together with good representation, I think. And so the state itself, I think, is doing some really good work as much as possible given the circumstances. I have not heard much from the representatives at the Senate or congressional or the House level. So that I know that in general, there's support for FEMA, for FEMA's continuation and solid funding. But obviously that's in flux as well at the moment. I might should leave it there.
Thank you for your work.
Yeah.
I will tell you, in New York, I live one block from the Susquehanna River, and a few years ago, 95% of the village that I live in was flooded. So these are not theoretical discussions for us. And
Absolutely.
I want to hold politicians' feet to the fire to do more to prevent the supersizing of these storms, which, as you said, scientifically have been shown to be caused by the climate crisis, by the global warming, and we can help reverse that or at least slow it down. So,
Absolutely, we can. And I think we also have to work with local officials
mhm.
to stop putting us in harm's way. Now, we know that these areas have flooded and will continue even without even in the absence of climate change. We will have periodic major flooding events because that's the environment, and water flows downhill. And so I think local zoning and the very weirdly kind of scattered codes situation that we have in America. Every jurisdiction is in charge of its own codes, which is very different than most other nations. But making sure that we have those up to date and that we, in the recovery process, I mean, I take on this responsibility with us too, is we cannot be putting people back in harm's way. That is, we must be doing a better job of that. And it takes financial incentives. It takes rules and regulations, which of course is not easy to implement. But I think we have to keep working at that so that every time we have this opportunity with a disaster or with an event that reminds us how vulnerable we are, that we take heed of that and move people out of the floodplains. And it's socially complex as well, but I think it's something we have to take much more seriously.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions? If so, can you use the raise hands button. I don't see anyone else at this point.
I appreciate everyone hanging on here.
Yeah. So, Anne, thank you very much. A very informative presentation. Thank you very much for the work that you are doing, truly doing God's work in that area. And I, for one, am looking forward to being back down with our church in August. We're already scheduled for our next trip. And yeah, just keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to having much more big picture conversations about how we do this in the future with all of you too.
And that's so important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Mindy, do you have some finishing slides you want to go through for us?
I can just do it real quick so that I
Okay.
don't hold things up. That way you can close us with a prayer. Let me share real quick here. Slideshow. I just want to mention the next few webinars that we're hosting. We have planning for the season of creation, which takes place in September, October. But we know that that kind of thing needs to be planned in advance. So our moderator, Courtney Wilcox, will be presenting a webinar next month on some thoughts on planning for the season of creation with your congregation. And then in June on the 9th, we have Dr. Paul Clements from Western Michigan University. I think that's correct. And he's done research and publications on climate migration, and he's going to be talking with us about that then. And then we have General Assembly with the PCUSA and the Presbyterians for Earth Care. We're supporting 3 different webinars, 2 related to Mark, why don't you say?
Yeah, 3 overtures to the General Assembly, 2 of them related to divestment from fossil fuels and supporting organizations within the Presbyterian Church to be able to move away from fossil fuels and adapt to climate change impacts. And then the other is on regenerative agriculture. So a group of people through our advocacy team are involved in working to try and get these approved in General Assembly. As many of you know, we've been trying the divestment route for a while now, and we're still working on it. But there will be an update on what happened at General Assembly on July the 8th at 7:30 in the evening. Fred Milligan, who's co-chair of our advocacy team at Presbyterians for Earth Care, and others who will be involved in the effort will be presenting in sort of a panel presentation and giving those updates.
Thank you. And then just a reminder that we offer this webinar free of cost. And so you're welcome if you so choose to make a donation to Presbyterians for Earth Care. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mindy. And again, thank you, Anne, for a wonderful presentation. This has been a great evening. Let's just close in a quick prayer. Creator God, thank you for the learning that has gone on this evening. Thank you for all of the things that we need to know. And now that we know all the things we need to do, be with us as we go out and use our congregations as good sources of information to help people to know how to better care for your creation. Be with all of us as we go our separate ways and come back together for the next webinar coming up in the next month. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.